Hey guys, I'm Pixel Dan, and this is a review of the Masters of the Universe Classics Leech. Adding to the ranks of the evil horde comes the evil master of powerful suction. The figure comes packaged in the standard Masters of the Universe Classics blister card, featuring the evil horde logo on the front, and even a little image on the side letting us know of the suction cup feature on his accessory. The back has a look at other action figures from the Classics lineup, namely other Horde and Princess of Power figures. And of course, we are treated to an all-new bio for Leech. Now, being one of the later releases in the original line, Leech was one of those figures who featured a whole new sculpt instead of sharing parts with other figures already out. So let's see how the Four Horsemen and Mattel handled him in this new lineup. Leech has a larger head than the others to really capture that large open mouth that he is known for. Now, the sculpt of the vintage figure's head was of course compromised a bit due to the large suction cup action feature that was on the front. I think many folks have that image of Leech in their minds, so that makes this new head look a little different than expected. But I personally really love the sculpt here quite a bit. He features huge teeth on his wide open mouth, which has that leech-like mouth in the center for suction. The little details on his head while looking at his profile are my favorite, as you can see when we get to comparison time later that the design of this head is actually really spot on to the design of the vintage figure's head. The Evil Horde logo is emblazoned across his chest. He also sports the same boot tops we saw with Hordak. And he's wearing a Horde armband attached to a pauldron on his left arm. Now, this piece is a separate piece from the sculpt of his arm and can be removed. Or at least it moves around on his arm. I'm not sure you could actually get it off due to the large size of his hands. But the fact that it moves around does help with the articulation of his ball-jointed shoulder, so it's not at all hindered. The overall paint job is pretty decent, as there's a nice mix of dark and light greens, and he's got a bit of that wash effect going on, especially on his legs and his arms. I only wish that that wash was translated more into his torso, especially in his armor piece. That part actually looks a little bit dull and plain, especially on the backside. Leech's hands and feet are large and suction cup shaped. However, this time around, they are not actually working suction cups. The tops of them are really cool looking though, as you can see his fingers and his toes spread open over the suction cup-like pieces. The underside, however, is a bit plain. There is really no detailing here. Now, I'm not really sure if detailing was actually necessary since these are supposed to just look like suction cups, but it might have been kind of neat to see those little tongues coming out of his hands like we saw on the 2000X version. Alright guys, so taking a closer look at Leech here. Now, I know that the general consensus has been that something seems a little off with the proportions on this figure, and I do have to actually agree with that. A lot of people, I think, blame the head, saying that the head looks a little too big, a little too large, but I'm not necessarily sure that I'm going to put the blame on the head as much as I'm going to blame the full upper body in general. Now, as you see, the upper body is brand new. It is much bigger, much larger, different shape than what we're used to seeing with the normal male bucks. This, of course, is because the vintage Leech figure was much bigger, much chunkier, and actually he kind of looked a little inflated, a little fatter than the rest of the figures. So he is a little slimmer here. He doesn't have that fat look, but he's still wider than the rest of the figures. The way this is actually accomplished is you can see that the body is a wider sculpt, but it is actually still on the basic lower portion that we usually see on the regular male figures. The difference is that the new loincloth piece that was made for this is also made to be wider so that it kind of fits in a little more in line, makes it go so that way you don't have this wide body sitting on this smaller pelvis. But that actually is the case underneath the flap down here. Now, I think what makes this look so strange is that it's the normal male arms and the normal male legs on top of this wider body type. And it just almost doesn't seem like it flows as well as it probably should. Again, we were talking earlier, the original vintage Leech figure was entirely new all the way around. As far as I know, it didn't reuse any parts from the vintage figures. This here utilizes these other parts, you know, because that's kind of what Masters of the Universe Classics really does. It's a cost-saving measure and helps us to get more of these figures produced. In this case here, I really do kind of feel that Leech would have been a figure that would have benefited from having brand new everything sculpted on him. I have to be perfectly honest and say that something does seem a little off about these proportions. He's also kind of got that same thing going on we looked at with Battlegrounds Tila before, where when you turn his waist, he looks really funky, and that's because you can actually see how much of this, the lower portion of the pelvis that was designed here is larger than the actual pelvis underneath to form fit with the upper torso. That's really noticeable when you turn his body to the side like that. So if you're going to twist his waist, you are going to have some funkiness going on there with the way he looks. So again, I mean, we saw that before with Battlegrounds Tila, kind of the same thing going on here. Now, one thing I do really like about this figure is the way that they accomplish the articulation in both his feet and his hands. The feet are on that rocker joint, so the ankle does rock left and right, which really helps with great positioning since he's got that big, wide, flat foot. You need to be able to rocker it a little bit so that, you know, you get the wider legs, you're still going to be able to put the feet flat on the ground. It also rotates around very well. I don't know if it's ball jointed up there, but it does. It rotates all the way around, rolls all the way around, so that however you position him, you should be able to get his feet flat on the ground. You don't have any problems. And since his feet are so wide, it actually works really well as its own figure stand and holds the figure up, especially since he's got this larger torso. It might make him a little top heavy. It's no problem because he's got great joints on his ankles and the wide feet that really hold him up. He's got the same thing going on with the hands there. The joint at the wrist is very nice. Allows for a great range of motion. It goes up and down. It does not rock as much as the feet do, but you can see it's got the cut there so that it goes forward, backward all the way, and it does rotate all the way around. Now what's good about this is you can actually get that nice brain-sucking pose out of Leech, which is something we could not accomplish with the original figure. This is something, you know, that Leech is known for, is being able to grab on to the Masters or your Great Rebellion members and just sucking the life force out of them. So it's really cool that you can actually accomplish this pose with the way that the joints were done on the wrists. It's very cool.
Leech includes 2 accessories. First up is the infamous Horde crossbow. You'll notice that this is a different sculpt from both Hordax and Grizzlors, which adds a great amount of diversity. Leech's version also has a clip on the underside instead of a handle, and it clips onto Leech's forearms nice and firm. He also includes this really cool net accessory that is shaped like the Evil Horde bat logo. It's made of a very soft rubbery material, and it has 4 suction cups on the ends. Now this can actually stick to flat surfaces to capture your heroic warriors or members of your Great Rebellion. I actually feel that this is a really cool nod to the action feature of the vintage figure, and it makes for a really fun additional accessory. Alright guys, it's comparison time! Here's Leech standing alongside the vintage version of the character. Now looking at them side by side, you really can see the similarities. The Horseman did a great job of paying attention to little details on the vintage figure, such as the mostly unpainted armband and pauldron on the left arm that they wonderfully updated for this new figure. And as I mentioned earlier, really look at the two heads side by side. Despite that large suction cup on the front of the vintage figure, you can see that the design all the way up to the shape of the lips on his mouth is all present in the new head. And here he is standing alongside the 2000X NECA Staction version. Now the similarities are still there, but the 2000X one is much larger and he's got a really cool look to him. I think I can honestly say that this is one of those rare instances where I prefer the 2000X design over the original. So while I really like this new Classics figure, I think the Staction is a bit cooler looking. Leech is overall a pretty cool figure, but I will agree with the folks who say that something does seem a bit off with him. And I do think it's those proportions mainly. I don't think it's the size of the head as much as I think that the fact that his larger upper body doesn't really seem to mesh entirely with the basic male arms and legs. I do really like the head sculpt though. I just think the Horseman did a great job of taking that vintage head and transforming it into an updated version of the same sculpt without that silly suction cup on the front. And of course, I'm certainly very happy to bulk up the ranks of the evil horde. Leech will be available in September on MattyCollector.com and is part of the 2011 Club Eternia subscription. Until next time.